Hi, this is Dean Phillips here, presenting Longevity Industries' Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I want to thank today the Precision Metal Forming Association for sponsoring our show and the PMA's Educational Foundation. We do appreciate them for handling everything when it comes to this show and being willing to tolerate us. Today, I have the distinct pleasure. I have Jan Egbers, who is with Watts Water Technologies. He is the Senior Supplier Quality Engineer. I'll get that yet. It's a little tongue twister there for me. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Dean. Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to be at Watts Water.
It's a long story. I worked for DuPont initially and spent 30 years with them, and then had a life change and found Watts Water Technologies, was a quality manager for them in Springfield, Missouri, and then that changed also, and now I'm a supplier quality engineer.
Excellent. Now, when you say that you started it in Missouri, now were you an engineer there before?
I actually started in Beaumont, Texas with DuPont.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's excellent. I'm sure that you probably have a lot of good stories from DuPont then, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was interesting as a young engineer deciding where to start my career and support my family, and let's just say the DuPont safety influence was a big factor.
Sure. So in your role, can you tell me a little bit about your role with Watts?
Sure. I go out and audit suppliers and make sure that their quality management system meets our requirements particularly for the ISO 9001-2015 certification. And if they're not, then is their quality system robust enough to assure that our risk is minimized?
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of technology you have to kind of feed back and forth, that they have to do reports directly to you, or do you do things are they more field visual inspections? Or
Yeah, they're mostly field visual, and again, as Kerry mentioned earlier, most of this is about relationship building. Unfortunately, some of our suppliers have not seen a Watts person in a long time. So to have a face and a person they can contact in order to express concern or solve a problem, then that becomes me.
Sure. That's great. I'm sure it's good from the standpoint of at least that you're the person who at least represents the company in their eyes. Mm-hmm. And the good part of that is that you're a real person, not just that entity out there, and it does change the way that people treat you.
Well, and also if I call or they call, it immediately you have a visual representation in your mind of who you're dealing with, rather than just a voice on the other end.
Sure. Now, with where you are now in the supply chain and quality, tell me a little bit about where some of the things that, on a practical level, that you're involved with that's going to change in the next few years.
Forgive me, it's a little tough question because I want to immediately go to my Six Sigma training and say, okay, define, measure, control. Anyway,
right.
I'm a little flustered right now, but DMAIC, yeah. And that's the tools, the Six Sigma tools I would use with our supplier to help improve their process. Mm-hmm. Everybody is shorthanded today. So bringing my black belt knowledge, Six Sigma black belt knowledge, to the front and to offer that to them, I can see that as being a win-win situation for Watts and for the supplier.
Sure. Now speaking of Six Sigma, one of the things obviously that when you're involved in Six Sigma is you want that homeostasis level. Everything you want it to stay consistent, because deviation, positive or negative, there's got to be a reason why.
Right.
And then it's a search for what is that reason? What is the cause? What is the root cause for that? Do you do a lot of that root cause analysis when you go out?
Very little. Again, it's mostly high-level stuff, and
Gotcha.
Usually, if it's not a new supplier, there is a history of specific items that they haven't performed well on. So those are the ones I'll be focusing on.
I gotcha. Do you do a lot of training with them, or is it more just coming in and just viewing what they're doing and making sure that their reports are...
Right. My responsibility mainly is to audit. And as Kerry mentioned earlier, we have training facilities that allow the supplier and customer to do the practical aspect of what we do.
When you talk about how you got involved in it, what drew you to this technology?
I think water is going to become more and more precious as time goes on. I think the Cape Town water shortage is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg of what we are going to be facing as humans, in that we keep expanding our population, we keep depleting that potable water resource, and with no real plans in the future for replenishing it.
Yeah, it is. You can see it. It's not so far off that you can't see this problem becoming a mammoth issue. So
when the Colorado River dries up before it reaches the sea, that's a problem.
yeah, there's no question. What are some of the things that, as far as technologies go, when you go out to customers, that you see them doing to try and improve what they're doing?
Okay. I see a wide range of suppliers and capability. So there's mom and pop who have limited resources, and then there's some major suppliers who have more sophisticated items such as PLCs or and taking SPC data from the process and trying to analyze what needs to be tweaked in order to hold that homeostasis that you mentioned. And then, a big factor is a lot of people have these morning meetings where everybody gets around and reviews the performance of the past 24 hours and what improvements need to be made and schedule for the day.
I've always, one of the problems I've had with those Monday morning meetings is from a lot of places you go, with the bigger the company, it's from one meeting to another meeting to another meeting. And when do you ever have an opportunity to execute?
I think that's it's a global sickness.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. In technology today, are there things that you see from your suppliers, you see that they're embracing technology-wise to change, like from material science and things like that?
I don't see it because it's a commodity industry. So the investment that could be there is not there. For example, AI. My vision is that in the future, what the smart speakers that we have in our homes will become the human-machine interface of the future. And it'll be recording everything that we need from a data standpoint because they're listening all the time.
Right. And then compiling sorting, putting it into spreadsheets,
Yep.
reports, and
Yep.
doing that. And I think you're right. There is an opportunity for things like that to occur because the technology is there, and we're not that far off from being able to do those kinds of things for.
Yeah, but it's also a function of investment and resources to allow that AI to expand beyond what the initial function is.
And that is true, and that's sometimes an overreaching issue that you see is that, people. I get very involved with our own systems that we use for tracking data and tracking information, and there's a real concern there of it becoming the big brother element there. The other side of it, though, is that you have to find a way to utilize that information for change and improvement. I hate the word change because it has this belief that it means improvement, and it doesn't. The word change in and of itself doesn't mean improving.
Correct.
And I've always said, if you mean improving, then say improving.
I agree with you because, technology can be used for good or bad, and it's just a matter of who's driving it.
Right. And, when we're speaking of commodities and things like that, obviously, how do we improve our output while reducing the amount of cost that we have associated with it?
And waste, yeah.
And waste. And certainly, that's a big element there. Are there different types of elements that people are going to that can reduce some of the costs in some of the things that we're doing now?
Oh, I think our chip development continues to not only increase in capacity, but also reduce in cost, which allows us to do the AI and whatever the next step is. So yes, I mean, mass production, chip development are integral and key to that expansion.
Mm-hmm. When you were in school, what drew you into the manufacturing side of it, as opposed to, let's say, going into a different technology than where you are now?
I think I wore out all the nuts and bolts of my erector set. I've always been hands-on, so and at the end of the day, to say I produced or helped produce something that is tangible, I think has a certain feeling of pride associated with it and accomplishment.
Absolutely. I think that's one of those things. We just had an event here with the National Science Foundation, and it was to get additive manufacturing into some of the schools, and with the hopes that we can try and draw in more students in that. I think, years ago you used to have more focus on additive manufacturing. I mean, I don't know if you remember Heathkit or some of those kinds of companies.
I do, yes.
Those kinds of companies, I could see a comeback in that, and it's in the form of these 3D printers and in things like Raspberry Pi and other technologies that people write programs for now. Do you think that will be something that the kids will start to get excited about, and we can then, those same children will be our leaders of tomorrow in our fields?
Absolutely. I think the most powerful thing we have to offer as humans is our imagination. And so the 3D printers and the apps, the computer capability is just a tool to allow us to do what Da Vinci wanted to do and had in his head, but never could put to form.
Sure. It's funny that you say that, because that was one of the things that I was talking to the students and some of the teachers about, is that the area that 3D printing has offered us is we've always been in engineering so regimented. This is the process. This is how it works. This is how this material will act. This is what will be the end result. 3D printing allows you that opportunity to be creative in a way that you're not really sure of how all of this is going to end up being. You can't tell a student, say, you can't make that part anymore, because that's what we used to say. Well, there's no way you can make that shape. Well, now you can make that shape. It's a shape that can be produced. And it's something that I personally think will be the changes that we can have tomorrow, is those kinds of technologies of marrying that creativity that somewhat engineering has maybe lacked or wasn't given an opportunity to explore, that tomorrow you're going to have that. Do you see that change coming in engineering?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the day where I carry a slide rule is long gone. Yeah, so again, going back to the capability that we have today, I see that as being nothing but an opportunity for engineers to stretch their limits of their imagination.
Yeah. I have to admit, I was not a big fan of going to adding the art aspect to the science, to the STEM curriculum. At the time, I did not see where art fitted into STEM. I did not see where that had a meaningful place. But now, with the way I see 3D printing going, I can see a true opportunity there for people to marry art with this creativity that can be produced through this engineering process. Have you seen more students that otherwise would never get involved in this see this as a direction now?
From a personal standpoint, I haven't had that much interaction with the young people as far as students go. But yes, I can clearly see it.
Yeah.
And if you go back in time and you look at our bridges, for example, they're a form of art. The geometric progressions that you see in the cabling and the patterns of those cross members, it is an art form.
Right.
So, engineers are very rigid in general, but to be able to add the art into it with 3D printing and technologies that we have today, I think will promote the profession.
What do you see as being some of the changes that you've seen in engineering from, let's say, when you got out into the field and actually got to leverage what you learned into work and a job and things like that? How does that change to today? Where do you see how that's shifted?
Unfortunately, I think today's generation has lost the capability of doing math in their head. They rely too much on the computers. I can put in a formula and measure the outcome as being true or false because I'm calculating along with it. So I think that art form is going by the wayside.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that that we don't ask that of any students anymore. We don't ask them to understand numbers.
Or even the formulas behind the apps that they are running to understand what causes turbulence in a mathematical form versus having laminar flow in a mathematical form. I mean, you can see it on your screen, you identify it, but to know at what point does that laminar flow become turbulent based on the calculations, I think is being lost.
Do you see that as an opportunity, though, for us to explore apprenticeships again and get, when we bring people in, and is there an opportunity to use that again?
I think so. Here again, how do you use AI to be able to capture what a journeyman knows and then turn it over to AI to have the apprentice learn from it, I think is an opportunity.
Yeah.
I think in general, we do not invest upfront in teaching younger people by having them working alongside the older person and learning from experience.
Yeah, I know when I went to work years ago in the stamping industry, I worked for a press manufacturer, and when I did, when you came in as an engineer, that wasn't the end of your learning, that was the beginning.
Absolutely.
I really think that that's somewhat lost. And also, we've expect a different thing out of the engineers today. They're more like project managers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even allow them to be engineers anymore. We just, okay, here, just handle this project. Go
Right.
make sure that these parts came in,
Right.
make sure that it runs. But we've
Yeah,
taken,
by nature, engineers are problem solvers, so they'll figure it out. But are they practicing their skills as far as what they learned in school? No.
yeah. And so as far as Watts Water and where the technology has been, as far as you see it today from where it was 5 years ago, do you think that same changes that you've seen or improvements over 5 years will be the same in the next 5 years? Will they be more or less?
My hope is that there'll be more.
Okay.
Okay. Take reverse osmosis, for example. Purifying water. I think nanotechnology has a place in potentially making that process, the purification process, much speedier and much more abundant.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's economics that are going to push it.
I think that's always the case. You could try and artificially prop something up and make, say, well, we should do this or this is, but the reality is that at the end of the day, if the economics don't warrant,
Work, yeah.
it doesn't, people aren't going to really, truly invest in that change and improvement if it's not there.
Right.
And over the years, I've seen that happen so many times in manufacturing. I travel to plants all the time, and when I do, there's a big difference between the plants that invest in it and where their trajectory is and what they're trying to accomplish, and the other plants. Now, one thing isn't necessarily better than the other. It's just who are you trying to do, or trying to accomplish. An example of that is if you went to the hardware store and bought those, 500 in a bag washers, there's now what's the quality? It doesn't matter, I mean, it's so low.
Form, fit, and function is not, it's there and that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you see a company that makes high-end washers that actually are, like peelable shims and things like that.
Or the beveled, contoured. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's room for both of those in the marketplace because they're serving two very different markets.
Right.
And one is not going to truly invest in technology improvements. The other one is because they know where their competition's coming from.
Right.
Do you see that being competition driven too, as well as obviously financial?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the tariffs that are imposed recently are going to change the whole map based on competition, based on where's the most economic place to manufacture. We have the advantage of having advanced techniques, advanced knowledge, and we got to pit that against the world cheap labor resource.
Right. Yep. And I think that you can't shut the world off and say that we do compete on a global level now.
Absolutely.
You can't ignore that aspect and
Right.
say, well, we should just, my competition, years ago, that competition was the guy down the street. 100 years ago, the person you were competing with is the guy down the street. Now you are not competing with the guy down the street.
No, it's the guy across the ocean.
That's right. That's right. And that's a big change. So what other things do you see as far as quality control areas that you'd like to see changes coming in?
Again, I think the opportunity to use machinery to measure as your in-process measurement, I think is the biggest improvement that we can see, or I see as. But again, that requires investment.
Yeah, but probably not as much as it used to be.
That's correct.
These machines. I was at the Smart Manufacturing Conference, and when I was there, I was amazed at the number of machines now. Machining centers, every piece of equipment had some level of measurement and reporting software built into it, because
Right.
that's how you're going to get better at your processes. And I think in some cases, talking back about those younger engineers, is that's how they're going to get information too, because if they're not trained to this level, the piece of equipment can still perform, without them having all the information that they need to have in their heads. They can accomplish it because the equipment's smarter.
And I think that's absolutely true. I've seen examples where people buy fancy robots, but then don't invest on the software engineer to run the robot, and you end up with garbage.
Right. It's like buying this big, smarter hammer. Well, we're just about out of time. Jan, thank you so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it. It's been great. And again, I'd like to thank the Precision Metal Forming Association for sponsoring our show. And I'd like to thank Watts Water for allowing you guys to be here today.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.